All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'll get things started. Welcome to everyone. Thank you for signing on with us this afternoon. The sun is shining here in Toronto as well, so I hope you're all having a good afternoon. Thanks for joining us from across the country today. My name is Rachel Yanchishin. I'm a senior project manager here at Park People, and I'm hosting today's webinar, our TD Park People Grant Question and Answer period. So today we'll be talking about some of the key aspects of the grant, as well as aiming to answer many of your questions. So we have a lot of people on the line. We're 80 plus and counting right now, so we may not have a chance to get to all questions, but do feel free to send them along over email in the coming days. You can use the chat function for your questions. You should be able to see a small chat icon when you move your mouse over your Zoom screen. And there you have the option of sending your message to all panelists and attendees. On the line with me as well is Stephanie Stanov and Sabine Malisani, my colleagues at Park People. We are also recording today's session and will be available on the Park People website during the grant application period for anyone who's unable to attend today. So as you've already started to do, feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat, say hello. We've got people from across the country, so we would love to hear where you're joining us from. So I'm going to start with a short introduction about Park People. For those of you who aren't already familiar with us, we support and mobilize people to help them activate the power of parks to improve the quality of life in cities across Canada. When communities get involved, parks get better. Our national network program provides comprehensive support to grassroots community groups, nonprofit organizations, and municipal staff across the country. Programs like this grant aim to provide communities with support and inspiration that they need to animate and improve their city parks, facilitate information exchange and peer learning between Canadians, as well as bring innovative city park ideas and projects to life through new partnership and research. This year, Park People is excited to celebrate our 10th anniversary of supporting individuals like yourself, park enthusiasts, grassroots community organizations, NGOs, municipal staff, and park professionals. And we are here to support you in your work to foster healthier and more vibrant community green spaces. Today, we are specifically talking about the TD Park People Grant Program, which is a grant program providing grants of $2,000 to groups from 9 geographic areas across Canada to help build vital connections between people and their parks. Through this grant, we hope to connect more people to parks in order to support ongoing care and protection of our green spaces. So this grant is to fund 3 events between April 17th and December 31st, 2021. This is the 4th year we've been offering this grant program. Over the past 3 years, TD Park People Grants have provided 293 grants to support over 716 events in city parks across 9 Canadian cities. And we are pleased to continue the program this year. Last year, we supported 163 community groups who hosted over 326 events and programs in person and virtually, despite such a new and challenging, unique circumstances that groups were facing. We also launched winter grants last year in an effort to truly embrace our nature as a winter nation. So we had a TD Park People Grants winter grants for the first time, where we supported 15 community groups in Vancouver, Toronto, and Montreal that delivered great nature-based activities that fostered environmental education, sustainability, and stewardship in a safe and winter-friendly way. This year, a minimum of half of all the grants will be given to groups working in underserved communities, ensuring that equity-seeking groups are involved in shaping the natural spaces that matter to them. In today's session, we'll be talking about eligibility requirements for the grant. We'll be talking a bit about permits and insurance. We'll be giving you some event ideas, what we're looking for in applications, a bit about the application process, some important dates for the grant program, and as well as answering your questions. So the first eligibility requirement I'll talk about is geography. So your group must be in one of the 9 selected areas, which is the list there on your screen. That's Metro Vancouver, Edmonton, Calgary, Winnipeg, the Greater Toronto Area, National Capital Region, which includes Ottawa and Gatineau, Montreal, Quebec City, and Halifax Regional Municipality. So the maps of these areas can be found on the FAQ page on the TD Park People Grants website. So at this time, the grant's limited to these areas. Do please feel free to share with us if you're outside of these areas, as we're always open to ongoing discussion and feedback about the program. So the dates of the events, this is as in previous years, the grant is for hosting 3 events. So the events can take place anytime between April 17th and December 31st, 2021. And they can be in-person or virtual events or a hybrid of both. Later in the presentation, we're going to share some types of events, some event ideas that would be eligible and how groups have pivoted to virtual format where necessary. So a little bit about the types of groups that are eligible. So this is definitely aimed towards grassroots community groups that include, but not limited to, volunteer-based park groups, local agencies, resident associations, and not-for-profit park groups are are active in their local parks. They're all welcome to apply, and definitely partnerships of all types are definitely encouraged to apply. Your group doesn't need a nonprofit or charitable status to apply. It's something I like to highlight too, to gear this towards grassroots community groups as well. And yeah, as I mentioned, a minimum of half of our grants will be given to underserved community groups to ensure that these equity-seeking groups are involved in shaping the natural spaces that matter to them. Underserved communities have historically seen less investment than other areas of cities, for example, in park programming or transit access. And these areas often include newcomers or people living on lower incomes. So that's definitely an aim of of the grant this year. Some cities have defined these areas, for example, Toronto's neighborhood improvement areas or Montreal's integrated urban revitalization zones. A few other considerations. Your group should be able to demonstrate your ongoing commitment to enhancing your green spaces. And also, we'd like to see a demonstration that you can sustain your group beyond the grant cycle. And a note about if you've previously received a TD Park People grant, you are eligible to apply again. But we would like to support as many new community groups as possible. So in cases of comparable applications, preference will be given to applicants who have not previously received a grant. If you did receive a grant, then we'll be looking for new ideas and events than what were previously funded. So the types of spaces. So we were really looking for parks or green spaces that are readily accessible to the public. So these can include city parks, but it can also include social housing grounds, school grounds, public plazas, and other urban green spaces that are publicly accessible. Private property or green spaces that aren't open to the public aren't eligible, but if you have questions about these spaces, please feel free to get in touch with us to confirm your eligibility. And if your events are virtual or they're hybrid, they don't need to be connected to a specific park or green space, but they do they should encourage participants to get outdoors before, during, or after the event. So in terms of the eligible expenses, so this list isn't exhaustive, but some of the eligible expenses include honoraria for volunteers, materials for your event, supplies and equipment, printing of promotional materials, permit costs, insurance costs, video conferencing software such as a Zoom license. Most event expenses are eligible. And just a note that up to 75% of the budget can be spent on human resources and the remaining 25 for event costs such as supplies and equipment. In the application form, we don't have a a budget template. It's just a chart where we're asking you to fill out your predicted expenses there, along with any notes about them. And if you are receiving funding from other sources, there's also somewhere to list those sources. And so the more details you can get to us, the better sense we can get of your group's level of preparedness for hosting events. And I'll pass it over to Steph for a few more slides.
Great, thanks, Rachel. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us, and look forward to sharing a bit more information with you. So I'm going to touch quickly on permits and insurance. So your events may or may not require a permit for the space in which they're being held, but for us, from experience, in order to ensure success, this is great research to do ahead of time. So try to take a look at the permitting requirements for your region, including any associated fees and processing times, and whether insurance is required for your type of event. And we know that depending on where you're located across the country, the COVID-19 situation is different. So for example, in Toronto, I don't believe park permits are being issued at this time. So try to monitor the situation and see. And we've gathered all the links for different municipalities' permit information that we'll share with you in the chat. And so this information can also be found on our frequently asked questions page on our website, with links to each municipality. So feel free to use this as a starting point in your research, and connect with us if you need any further information. Now that you're trying to think about what kind of event you'll host, we have a few things to keep in mind. So your event must be free, meaning there's no charge of admission or entry fee to participate. However, you may have vendors or food for sale as a component of your event if it's safe to do so at that time. Events must also be accessible and inclusive to everyone, and they must also have an environmental component. So whether this is through environmental education, a commitment to sustainability practices, or stewardship activities. This environmental component can be just an element of a large event, or it can be the main focus of your event. And in the next few slides, we'll give some examples of what this can look like, especially with things like social distancing, public health considerations, or virtual event formats in mind. So environmental education as a component can work to raise awareness about the green space itself and the value of taking care of it. So think of things like a guided nature walk or a workshop on climate change. And these things can also take place in person, but they can also take place online. And we've seen groups have success with doing this online. Your event could also demonstrate a commitment to sustainability practices. So perhaps your event is centered around something else like a movie night. You could also decide to make the event zero waste or carbon neutral as a way to demonstrate this commitment to sustainability practices. And then the other way to demonstrate an environmental component is through direct stewardship activities. So things like a park cleanup or a planting event, or caring for a community garden. And keep in mind when you're thinking about your events and you're writing your application that this environmental component is significant to the TD Park People grants, so it's something to just always be aware of. A few other things we'd like to mention. This grant can go towards existing programming, and you can receive a TD Park People grant while receiving other grants or other funding for the event. So there's a space on the application to indicate under other funding sources. Just be sure to note any other funding here. You can also apply to host 3 of the same events within the given time frame. So for example, hosting 3 nature walks. But one of the things we look for in the application is creativity. So if you're planning to host 3 of the same events, try to think about ways that you can approach the event a little bit more creatively. So for example, reaching different audiences like seniors or youth at each event. And as was mentioned earlier in the presentation, in 2020, Park People launched the first ever TD Park People Winter Grants. And we wanted to share a few tidbits about what it's like to host winter events, keeping in mind that these grants run until December 31st, 2021. And we'd love to see events that get people outdoors during all seasons and all types of weather. So some things to keep in mind when hosting winter events are movement. So what types of activities can you do to keep people's bodies moving and allow them to stay warm while participating? So thinking about things like winter bird walks, snowshoeing, or other active recreation activities. And then warmth is another key one. So where possible, fire pits or propane heaters can be a great way to encourage people to come together outdoors and allow them to stay a little bit longer in the cold. And then lighting and art, both of these elements work together to create a feeling of warmth and bring a little bit of extra joy to participants at your events. And of course, safe activities during COVID-19. So we know that hosting events over the past year has presented community groups with a whole new set of challenges. Um, and all we ask is that your events follow local public health guidelines at the time of the event. So maybe a month out or a couple weeks out of your first event happening, it's good always to check in with the situation and see how that might influence how you originally planned your event. We've seen a lot of our TD Park People Grant recipients over the past year get incredibly creative, and so we wanted to share some tips about what your events could look like this year if COVID-19 restrictions are still in place in your city. So online and virtual events are eligible for funding. And we've seen things like online environmental education sessions actually do quite well, like tree identification or learning a bit about birds or your local ravines. And some interesting events have also taken a bit of this hybrid approach where there's some virtual event elements and some in-person elements. Still Moon Art Society in Vancouver did this really well last year by hosting a Zoom session where participants learned about the birds that they might encounter in the early dawn and what birds are singing about as the sun starts to rise. And so participants were encouraged to go outside at 5 a.m. the next day to record a minute-long audio clip of the bird sounds in their neighborhood. And then they shared their individual bird recordings back with Still Moon Art Society, who compiled them into a playlist and shared it with everyone who shared their audio clips from their neighborhoods. And it was a really great interactive experience. Another style of event that we saw a lot this year was this idea of asynchronous events, or people being in the same place but at different times to accommodate social distancing. So for example, you might do this through a chalk art contest along a specific sidewalk in the park or in the neighborhood. Another example of this is the Ephemeral Forest Project in Montreal, hosted by one of our TD Park People Winter Grant recipients, Coalition des Amis du Parc Jarry. So it works kind of like a pumpkin parade if you're familiar with that style of event. But instead of bringing pumpkins to the park, participants were invited to bring their Christmas trees to the park after the holidays were over. The trees were set up as a temporary forest, and visitors were invited to attach decorations or wishes for the park to the trees. And then after a few weeks, the trees were picked up by a company specializing in repurposing wood, and the trees were given a new life. So really interesting event ideas that we've really never seen before. And we're seeing new style of events come up all the time just because groups were forced to sort of get creative this year. And to give you an idea of what we're looking for in applications, I'm just going to go over the criteria that grant applications are being assessed on. So we talked a bit about that environmental focus. We're really looking to see the ways that groups are making stewardship creative in order to better engage their community. Rachel touched on this, underserved communities. Again, our commitment is to award a minimum of half of the grants to groups working in underserved communities, ensuring that equity-seeking groups are involved in shaping the natural spaces that matter to them. So for example, maybe your community, your group in particular serves members of Black, Indigenous, or people of color. And so that would be something to highlight in your application. Inclusion and accessibility is big. In your application, your group should explain how your event will be inclusive and reach a diverse audience. So try to seek out groups and individuals who are often underrepresented, like seniors, youth, newcomers, and lower income individuals. You could also work to involve your community in the event planning and organization process. So we want to see that you're making an effort to represent community interests to the fullest extent possible. And then try meeting people where they are. So for instance, consider hosting events in the green spaces surrounding community housing complexes, or get youth involved by hosting your event in green spaces where young people already tend to hang out. And then creativity in event ideas. We're always looking for unique and interesting event ideas and something we haven't seen before. Geographic diversity. Not only are we working in a bunch of cities across the country, but we like to see representation in different neighborhoods in each city. So maybe it's a neighborhood that doesn't see a lot of programming. We like to see events happening there too. And then reach, we always, events of all sizes are eligible, but we're looking to see events that reach a larger audience. And of course, that's can be challenging for in-person events this year, but always doing our best to follow local health guidelines and also reach as many people as possible. And then strength of application is the last piece. So we want to know that your events are feasible. Groups should demonstrate that they're capable of pulling off all 3 events. So do your best to describe your past event experience and make a compelling argument for describing your proposed events. And that's it. I'll pass it back to Rachel.
Thanks, Steph. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about the steps in accessing and filling out the application form. So the first step is to create a profile for your group on our online map. So there's a lot of benefits to joining our online map, to being a part of the Park People Network. People can search their neighborhood for groups active in their local park. So if your profile is on that map, then folks can find you there. And it can also be a tool to see what's happening in parks across the country for people who are doing work similar to yours. By joining the map there, you're joining a network of, we have, I think, over 800 groups now involved in animating and activating their local parks. And just a note, if your group does have a profile already on the map, we ask that you do not create another one. So just get in touch if you need any help updating your profile, and that's no problem. We have many groups applying in some cities, so take a look at your map, and perhaps there's some groups close by that you could maybe collaborate or partnership in there. There might be great opportunities for partnership in there. So once you have created once you're logging in to create your Parks group profile, just be sure to include some of those key details, like the name of your group, the park where you're working, a concise description of what your group does, and any contact information. And then once you have created the profile, that's when you'll be in the dashboard section of the website, and you'll be able to download the application form. And then the form is available in a Word or PDF format, so you can download whichever format works best for you and fill that out, and then submit it back to us by email to the email address on the screen, which is boursetdppgrants@parkpeople.ca. And you'll receive a confirmation email within a couple of business days to let you know that we've received the application, and we'll notify all applicants in mid-April by email. So just a note on some important dates to note. So the deadline for grant applications is Monday, March 1st. And then in mid-April, we'll notify all applicants of the outcome of their applications, and around the same time the checks for the full amount of the grant will be issued in mid-April. And then the time frame for hosting the events is from April 17th to December 31st. So we've just launched a whole bunch of information your way. So now it's your turn to ask us some questions, and we'll do our best to address them. And again, we've over 100 folks on the line. So if we don't get to them, we'll do our best over email or connecting over the phone over the next couple of weeks. So I will pass it. So Steph, do we have a few questions on the line?
Yep. Yeah, we have some questions here, and I know we have more coming in, so we'll do our best to address them all. A few questions that came up earlier in the presentation. Can one organization apply more than once?
Okay, so that's a good question. We would like just one application per organization, and if you are working in partnership with another group, then that's a good opportunity for the application to come from another group if there's multiple initiatives, but only one application per organization.
Great. And then would it be possible to provide a bit more detail about the 75% honoraria for volunteers?
Sure, yeah. So the percentages that I talked about there with the expenses are the kind of suggestions that up to 75%, 3/4 of the grant could be spent on honoraria or human resources, but that's not prescriptive. It doesn't have to be 75% for that and 25% for supplies. It's just that is those are the loose limits of the spending the money, but it can be anywhere from 0 to 75% on human resources or honoraria, and but if you want to spend 100% of the budget on event expenses like printing flyers or something, it's pretty much at your discretion, but those percentages are there as just suggestions of letting you know where you can allocate the funds.
Great. And are we interested in working with elementary or high school classes, or in groups working with elementary or high school classes?
Yeah, I mean, partnerships are definitely encouraged. Like the more groups involved in these conversations and these events, the better. We've funded in the past, we've funded like parent councils of schools, and involving youth is a wonderful thing. So working with school groups is definitely encouraged, but they do need to, the eligible organizations do fall under the nonprofit or charities or grassroots community groups. Yeah.
Great. We're getting a lot of questions about this sort of partnership piece, and I think it's important um, to think about these things. So one person asked that their community vegetable garden is located a few meters from a new pollinator garden that was initiated by local residents. Can we both apply for a grant, or should we combine our efforts and work together? And I definitely think that's up to you and unique to your circumstances. But Rachel, I don't know if you'd agree, but I think both groups can apply, or you can work together and pool your efforts.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Steph. I mean, the situation, individual situations can be a whole wide range of setups, but more heads together can result in maybe a stronger application. So, and especially if maybe there's different communities involved in the two projects, and to see those communities working together on one application would be great. So, yeah.
Yeah. We have a question from Lloyd here. Does a group need to be incorporated to apply? And the answer for that is no. It can be an informal community group or park group, or it can be a nonprofit, but you don't need to be incorporated to apply. And then Andrea asked, rather than a general public audience, can it be targeted to a specific underserved population? And that's actually something we'd encourage. We like to see applications that support groups that aren't often receiving programming in their local communities, or that maybe aren't engaging in nature activities as often. We definitely like to see applications that are a bit more targeted, for sure. And then a question here, does the grant need to be spread equally across the 3 events, or can one event use more grant funds and the other a little bit less?
Yeah, so again, that allocation of the funding is up to your discretion. So you can be spending the funds as you see fit across the 3 events.
Great. Tina asked if she read correctly that there are 72 grants in total for all of Canada, with 50% or 36 of them going to underserved community groups. So you wrote here identified community centers, but they're going to underserved communities. And the definition of that is a bit broad and varied depending on circumstances. But yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, we've had it's a keen eye for detail that you've got there, and it is actually something that wasn't mentioned in the session, but we are awarding a total of 72 grants across 9 cities. So um, the uh, some cities we have more to offer than others, but just so you're aware of the kind of competitive nature of that we have, that's our situation there.
We have a lot of questions still here, so we're going to try and get to as many of them as possible. And I'm noticing that some of them are a bit specific to your unique circumstances. So in those scenarios, I would encourage you to reach out to us directly, and we can have a conversation via email or over the phone, and give you a bit more advice and feedback on your specific circumstances. Another question here, would the grant support some communications costs to promote the actual events?
Yes, so that with the communications piece, once the grants have been awarded, we do provide some resources. We have some flyer templates and some poster templates. So there's some resources that we provide on the communications front, and then that communications expenses would definitely fall under eligible expenses of ways to allocate the funds. Yeah.
And should groups be applying for online events or include some in-person events in hopes that things will get better? Um, and so what's the approach there? What's your thinking, Rachel, in terms of trying to plan for in-person events where possible, or just defaulting to virtual?
Yeah, it's a really great question, and one that we've all been living with this past year, and is still to come. And it doesn't seem like things will be opening up to large crowds of people anytime soon. So I think that the best advice is to we of course always recommend to follow like the municipal guidelines at the time, just because it is a large country and all the cities are um, operating under different recommendations. So definitely check in there first. But it is up to your group's discretion how you want to plan it. We do want to be optimistic, but probably for this year, the sort of safest bet is to be planning events that involve, physical distancing, or as Steph was talking about, asynchronous events, having a virtual component that connects the when you're connecting larger groups of people, that's happening maybe in a virtual way, but then that there also is this tangible experience with nature and with parks and green spaces. So we can be optimistic, but we should also be safe. So that's definitely my encouragement.
Sure. There's one question here actually that would be a good, I think, last one to wrap up with. Perhaps we have a question about, is there a final report required? And so maybe we can touch a bit on reporting requirements for this grant.
Yeah, great, Steph. Yeah, I agree. That's a good one to finish up with. That there is the final reporting, as is the theme of this sort of first time granting opportunity for a lot of people. The reporting is also fairly straightforward. There is a final report to submit that just lets us know how many people participated in the program. We're looking for stories, so we ask for a couple of photos from the events, a great quote from any participants or volunteers involved. So there isn't any financial reporting at the end, but we're looking for those stories and those creative ways that we're engaging communities with their green spaces. Great. So yeah, I think we'll wrap up this period. But thanks again for all of your questions. We'll be updating our FAQ page with any extra answers we have here, and definitely send us along any further emails, and we'll get in touch. So moving on, just to wrap things up, regardless of the grant outcome, you are now connected to us and to the Park People Network. So we have many more things to offer as well. I encourage you to check out our resource page, where we have resources on activities and events, and we've had a COVID-19 resource and parks COVID-19 and Parks resource page put up this year that has some really interesting webinars to watch, things to read that can help you with your work in parks. And just to encourage you, just if you don't already, to sign up for our newsletter. We have a bilingual national Facebook group with lots of good things being shared there. So be sure to check out both of those. And just again, thank you for all your time today. And we're really looking forward to reading your applications and hearing about the great work that you're doing in parks. And stay in touch and be well. Thanks.